We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 28th of May 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, thousands of Palestinians overrun a food distribution centre backed by the US and Israel. We'll examine assertions that this is a weaponisation of aid. Also coming up.
And I'm very excited to meet again with my brother, President Prabowo. He's a great friend of mine.
Can Emmanuel Macron offer East Asia a real alternative to America? We'll look at a tour aimed at wooing countries to the return of a rules-based trade order. We'll be out with the troops taking part in the biggest military drills in Estonia's history, and we'll debunk a few myths about the Finnish sauna.
People are thinking that in Finland everybody goes naked in the sauna. That's not true.
Plus a look at the papers, and we'll ask, why would Air Canada serve its passengers Japanese food? That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in today's news. US embassies have been told to stop scheduling appointments for student visas. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky visits Berlin today for the first time since Chancellor Friedrich Merz assumed office. And Panama has declared a state of emergency in one province after a strike at the Chiquita banana plantation led to 5,000 workers being laid off. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, reports from Gaza say thousands of Palestinians overran a controversial aid distribution hub when it opened yesterday. Warning shots were fired after crowds seized food parcels from the centre, which is backed by Israel and the US. The new system involves setting up several distribution hubs, in the south of the territory. The UN and several other agencies are refusing to take part in the scheme, saying it flouts established humanitarian principles. Well, I'm joined now from Amman in Jordan by Shayna Lowe, who's a communication advisor for Palestine at the Norwegian Refugee Council. Welcome back, Shayna. Good morning.
Good morning.
So just if you could paint a picture as accurately as you can of what we believe happened at this hub.
You know, it still is unclear. We obviously did not have any staff at the hub. But from what has been reported, it appears that the attempted distribution devolved into chaos. Thousands of desperate, starving, hungry Palestinians charged into the site. It appears that the American contractors lost control of the site. Shots were fired. We've heard reports that some Palestinians seeking aid were killed. This is not a surprise. We have been warning for months now, for weeks now, that this plan was not feasible, that it did not adhere to humanitarian principles, and that it would not protect Palestinian civilians who are desperate for food and seeking any type of assistance.
Tell us more, would you, about the plan that seems to be being put in place by the Israelis and the Americans, and why the objections to it are so strong?
Well, this plan would establish several what they're calling distribution hubs in which Palestinians would need to walk, often for many kilometers. Of course, there's very limited transportation in Gaza due to fuel shortages and the devastation of the infrastructure within Gaza. So they would need to walk many kilometers to access these distribution points. and pick up to 20 kilos of aid to carry back to wherever they are displaced to. These hubs do not reach people in Gaza wherever they are. It means that people who cannot trek those long distances, especially vulnerable people, pregnant women, the elderly, people with disabilities, single-headed households where children require care and parents cannot leave their children, would be essentially prevented from accessing aid. And we also are extremely concerned that these hubs are really being used to promote Israel's political and military objectives and could lead to the mass forced displacement of Palestinians. This could amount to forcible transfer, which is a grave violation of international humanitarian law.
In what way? Making it absolutely impossible for people, for example, in the north of Gaza to gain access to aid. Therefore, they have to displace, they have to move.
Exactly. And so we have voiced our concerns. The UN has voiced their concerns. The humanitarian sector is by and large united that this proposal, this scheme, which we're now seeing in the first days of implementation, is not practical, it's not humane, and it violates the core of our humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence.
Explain a little, though, about what the options are. I mean, there is, up until now, an enormous struggle by any humanitarian agencies. The UN, the Red Cross, the Red Crescent are all struggling with access. And one of the suggestions is that this solution, although full of problems, is currently the only way that aid can realistically get into Gaza.
Well, that simply is not true. We saw during the 6-week ceasefire that when the UN and humanitarian agencies, partners of the UN, are able to scale up and bring in the amount of assistance that's needed and are given access to all areas of Gaza to reach people who are in need, we have the capacity to do that. There is a plan. It's the plan that the UN and NGOs have been promoting for the last 20 months or so, which is to open up Gaza's crossings, allow for an influx of aid. The UN this morning announced that they have 171,000 metric tons of food assistance, enough to feed the population of Gaza for 3 to 4 months, pre-positioned and just waiting to get into Gaza. We know that our plan works because we saw that it worked in January and February when we had access and when Israel allowed for increased flow of goods, of aid into Gaza.
Explain a little bit more about the longer term problems that aid agencies have. I mean, you mentioned the fact that this blockade has created an enormous backup of aid which cannot get into Gaza. But the difficulty that people are finding is that aid in theory should be impartial, but given, for example, you will have Palestinian workers working for the likes of the Red Crescent, and that will make it very, very difficult for any kind of impartial decision to be made. How do you navigate your way through this, where what is well-intentioned, what on paper is impartial, will at some point be unacceptable to somebody?
Well, impartiality means that we don't distinguish between people who are in need of aid. We provide aid based on needs. And to do that, we conduct assessments to understand what those needs are and make sure that we're tailoring aid to those needs. So the Palestinian national staff members of NRC and other international agencies do apply those principles of impartiality, ensuring that communities are served and not neglected, ensuring that people who are in need receive the necessary assistance. And we've seen that works. We've seen that there has not been widespread aid diversion, which has been alleged by Israel. They have yet to present any evidence to prove any of that. We know that when we're allowed to bring in aid to scale, that we're able to conduct there's a resumption of law and order, that Palestinians are less likely to self-distribute off of trucks, that we see looting incidents go down, because we know that people know that aid is on the way and will reach them.
How do you think that the increasing number of voices such as Canada, France, the United Kingdom, Spain, and indeed indeed Israel's close ally, Germany, saying that the attacks on Gaza are inflicting a toll on civilians that can no longer be justified. How much does that help your cause trying to get people help in Gaza? Because there are many accusations now that Israel is weaponizing aid.
Well, I think it's been clear that Israel has been weaponizing aid, and we've seen that over the last 20 months where aid has been heavily restricted. Aid agencies have been obstructed in trying to access aid once it reaches the Gaza side of crossings and to safely deliver that aid. I think it's heartening that we're seeing donor states and others, many of which are Israel's closest allies, speak out against what Israel is doing. The death toll is far too high. As of now, the official death toll is 54,000 people just killed in hostilities. And many thousands more remain buried under the rubble, inaccessible. And then we have a civilian population that is quite literally starving to death. While famine has yet to be officially declared, there is no doubt that Palestinians are desperate for food. Our colleagues on the ground tell us about the desperation that they see, that people's hair is falling out, that their teeth are decaying because of lack of nutrition, that they complain of being tired, of having headaches, of being unable to even go out to look for what might be available because they are so exhausted from the starvation. And so it is far too late for the international community to be waking up to this, but we welcome their pushback. We welcome their support for the UN and humanitarian agencies to do our jobs the way we are intended to and to reach people throughout Gaza who are in desperate need.
Shayna Lowe, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Amman. You're listening to The Globalist. NATO troops are taking part in the alliance's largest exercise in Estonia's history. It's called Exercise Hedgehog, and it sees more than 18,000 soldiers from various NATO countries taking part in a simulated war game against an attack from Russia. Our Helsinki correspondent Petri Burtsov sent us this report.
It's not every day a farmer lets you park a 155mm M777 howitzer in his potato field. But that's exactly what happened in southern Estonia, where Canadian troops from the Royal Canadian Horse Artillery are rehearsing how to fire and reposition in rapid time.
Lieutenant Colonel Jordan Beatty. I'm the commanding officer of the Multinational Artillery Battalion Group. So our intended message is to deter any further Russian aggression. So that is our mission, and that's quite clear to us. So we are deliberately training here for that reason. There's many scenarios we train for. This is just one of them, but it's certainly our training is a demonstration that we can at large scale deploy to this area and conduct operations.
Tuleta mingi süsteemi ette. Aga see, kuidas Niina me täna hommikul ikka läbi tuli, mis ta oli.
Estonia shares a 300-kilometer border with Russia. If a war were to break out here, NATO would need to respond in hours. That's the logic behind this exercise, the biggest in Estonia's history, with over 18,000 soldiers from various NATO countries taking part, not just to practice firing weapons, but to see how well allies can move, deploy and communicate under pressure.
Part of our mission that we've been given is to establish a main defensive area to simulate NATO defending, from an aggressor in this region, and that's essentially what we've done. We've established our main defensive area, and we're now exercising. And our enemy at the moment appears to be a Swedish armoured battle group, but hopefully, if push came to shove, they'd be on our side.
A 6 Alpha at this moment, we don't think.
That's Major Hamish Waring. He's part of the UK brigade that, in case war broke out, would be deployed to Estonia on a month's notice to defend NATO's eastern flank together with other allied troops. But working together isn't always straightforward.
different militaries have different systems, and just interoperability of those systems sometimes requires either workarounds or practicing in terms of how to make those systems work to each other. Another one is language, and although the British aren't particularly good at speaking other languages, and other nations are usually quite excellent at speaking English, but it's actually the real nuance of language in terms of when we're talking about a picture on the battlefield.
Swedish troops, meanwhile, are driving Hägglund's CV-90s, powerful infantry vehicles equipped with 40mm guns. They're maneuvering through the woods outside Võru in southern Estonia. Sweden only joined NATO last year, and its forces are still finding their rhythm with their new allies, as Captain Oskar Dahl explains.
Well, it's a good event to be able to practice with the other allies, learning by them, lessons learned, see how they fight and how we can be better together, fight good together. And from the battalion level down to the soldiers, it's a lot of good training opportunities, an exercise like this.
Back near the front, I meet a group of local soldiers. They're not professional ones, but reservists. Estonia relies heavily on them, civilians trained to fight. Inside a bunker dug into a pine forest, I meet a 21-year-old Estonian reservist Peter Lääniste taking a short break from trench duty. He's missing 2 weeks of university to be here. He's hunched over a map and glancing up at a drone overhead, piloted by Ukrainians with real combat experience.
What's your sense as a reservist taking part in these exercises, given the threat posed by Russia and the whole geopolitical situation? I guess very different from, let's say we go back 10, 20 years. Now this is for real. How does it affect your sort of motivation and feelings when you participate?
You push yourself a lot more, for sure. A lot more people come out here. They don't stay at home and make up excuses. It's hard for us to come to this exercise who have just finished conscription, because most of us go to university. If I leave this exercise, I have a whole week of exams and everything, so it's gonna be non-stop, no sleep.
But yet you're here.
Yeah, I have to. It's my responsibility, so to say.
From the forests of southern Estonia, where real soldiers practice for a war everyone hopes will never come, for Monocle Radio, this is Petri Burtsov.
And my thanks to Petri Burtsov for sending us that report from southern Estonia. You're listening to The Globalist. Let's continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Monocle's writer Julia Lassica. A very good morning to you, Julia. How's the Lassica world today?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty early here in London, but it's already nice and warm, so I'm happy.
Do you know, it is. It's not bad. Yeah, Going into work in the morning is now an absolute joy, with the sun creeping over the BT Tower. Quite romantic, even. Right, on that glorious note, let's talk about Donald Trump. The accusation that from Trump to Putin a couple of days ago, he called him crazy, and there was that sort of slight patronising dressing down of sort of saying he's a bit emotional. When you feminise Donald Trump, I'm not entirely sure how successful you are, but it does sort of really pinpoint the way that the communication between between Washington and Moscow has become an incredibly delicate balance.
Definitely, yeah. And then last night we saw as well Trump posting that, if it wasn't for him, then Putin would be in really, really big trouble. Really, really bad things would be happening to Russia. And what I found fascinating about this was that there's this professor of strategic studies at St Andrews up in Scotland, Phillips O'Brien. He was posting about it. And I mean, he was sort of saying what everyone was thinking, which is that well, my first reaction when I saw it was, oh my gosh, he's just openly said he's a Russian agent, because he's sort of said, I'm protecting, I'm protecting the Russia, I'm protecting Putin, I'm sort of holding myself up as a shield. And then almost immediately, all these cartoons of him protecting Russia as if a shield, a human shield, sort of started to pop up over the internet. But also, Phillips O'Brien was talking about how, this actually shows that Trump is really feeling the pressure to get tough on Russia. And we know that there's this sanctions bill that we've been going on and on about, the Republican and Democratic sanctions bill that's basically ready to go now. If Trump says yes, it has 81 co-sponsors. It's ready to go, and it's all on secondary sanctions. So anyone who's aiding Russia, so for example, China, India, countries like this that are aiding Russia in getting around the sanctions, they themselves, these secondary countries, will come under pressure. But also, Phillips O'Brien then reposted this fascinating Russia Today, so state-controlled international media, a tweet from them where they said, Trump's sort of tweet leaves little room for misinterpretation until he posts the opposite tomorrow morning. So everyone's laughing.
Indeed, and it's an interesting thing that we were following here, because when you said that Phillips O'Brien, not that anybody would ever accuse Phillips O'Brien of overthinking this, but one wonders if you have to place it in the rest of Donald Trump's context, that he is he always says that he's saving everybody all the time. That is just what he says. Yes, there is a problem now that Trump and Putin talk directly. This starts to change rules that Joe Biden would never have transgressed, would never have broken. But the point is, isn't it, that Donald Trump, one wonders how well thought out each comment is. What effect does that have on Ukraine, though?
I think it's quite actually reassuring in a weird way to see him openly say, I'm protecting Putin, I'm protecting Russia, because I think that there's this sort of unease about in Ukraine, and I mean in Europe. I mean, all of us sitting here in London, there's an unease about what's going on in the background. I mean, I feel quite reassured, when Starmer and Macron explained to us what there's the diplomacy that they've been pursuing with Trump, the diplomacy they've been pursuing with, the American side, and it's nice to see sort of behind the scenes, those amazing pictures we saw from the Vatican of Zelensky and Trump having that meeting. That was deeply reassuring, I think, for lots of people across the continent, including in Ukraine. But I think that, also, it's very tricky because now, one of the things that Zelensky said back in February that really, really annoyed Trump was that, his mind and J.D. Vance's mind, they're infected by Russian propaganda. And that really, really annoyed them because it showed that they sort of had this lean in their thinking. But I think this really does, demonstrate that once again.
Furthermore, we now have Europe doing what it can to step up, still trying to figure out how it does that. And one of the ways that people are suggesting is that now that Friedrich Merz is the new Chancellor of Germany, that there will be a new energy galvanising the European approach to Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky is on his way to Berlin right now, where he's going to meet Merz. He's met him before, but this is the first time that Zelensky goes to Berlin with Friedrich Merz as the Chancellor.
Yeah, but there's been sort of some embarrassing missteps leading up to this visit, unfortunately. So Merz came out a few days ago and said that, the UK, the US, etc., France, Germany, they've taken all their sort of limitations off Ukrainian long-range strikes into Russia. Ukraine can do whatever they want. Then Ukrainians sort of were jubilant, everyone was celebrating. And then a few hours later, another member of the German parliament came out and said, actually, no, we don't comment publicly on these things. Please sort of disregard in as many words as that. And then we've had in the last few days, over the last few days and leading up into this visit, intel coming out that actually there have been some changes. They were made a few months ago. This isn't really, this doesn't really show that there's this new momentum, this new energy that we were referencing before. And actually, we've been also told that Taurus missiles, so the missiles that Ukraine desperately wants to be able to strike inside Russia, into ammunition depots, into airfields where Russian bombers are waiting to take, to launch, and also on drone factories as well. Basically everything that's targeting Ukrainian civilians night after night and making life so unbearable. In Kyiv and other Ukrainian settlements and cities and towns, Ukraine is not going to be receiving these Taurus, and this is something Ukraine's been asking for a very, very long time, to protect their civilian population and to help give them the winning hand in the war. This will not be announced today. So I think it's about Merz sort of balancing his, I think, maybe ego, kind of wish, desire to be able to do more, because it's great to see that he wants to do more, but I think it's being balanced with this coalition.
Indeed, I mean, the lifting of the block on long-range missiles into Russia was clearly a huge step, and one wonders if this had happened 3 years ago, things might be slightly different. Yeah. Well, when you talk about the sort of the mood music that Merz wants to project, nonetheless, they've had 3 meetings in 3 weeks, and Merz was on that train into Ukraine with Macron and Starmer 2-3 days after the chancellorship was cemented. And so can we find some areas of hope in this?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, Merz is also will be visiting the Finnish army, Finnish leaders. He'll be learning from Finland and how they are being held up now and have been for the last year and a half, really, in Europe, as this is the model. This is what Europe should become. So Finnish is kind of, the model is total defence. So every person in society has a role for when crisis, not just war, but crisis strikes. And it's not just about the army, but it's also about civilian resilience. And he's going there to visit that and to see how that works. And I think that's really, really positive, because he's sort of rebuilding trust that Olaf Scholz and that sort of, I guess, Angela Merkel sort of really lost, because they sort of started to look away from that really strategic, how can Europe integrate its defence systems? Yes.
Let's move to a Ukrainian paper, which you're going to have to translate for me, but it is an accusation of towards JP Morgan Chase, which blithely assumed that hostilities between Russia and Ukraine would be done by the summer. I mean, you've got to give it to them that they have a little bit of hope that there's going to be some sort of positive conclusion. But this has not gone down well with anybody, has it?
No, exactly. So this has, again, been circulating in Ukrainian social media, and people were sort of poking fun at it and saying, what on earth is going in here? So this is an opinion piece from Marina Danilyuk-Yarmolaeva, who is a Ukrainian journalist, and she's talking about this JP Morgan sort of model that they released, which sort of outlines what will Ukraine's future be like. So 50% chance, they say, is that it's a Georgian scenario. So the war ends by the summer somehow, who knows how, but instability in Ukraine continues. They aren't given path to NATO, there's stagnation, etc. Then there's a 50% chance of a South Korean scenario, so no membership of NATO, but there is continued support from the US. Then there's the Israel, there's the 20% likelihood that it will become like an Israeli scenario, so stable Western support, ongoing operations by the Ukrainian army. And then there's a 50% chance, according to JP Morgan, that Ukraine becomes a vassal state of Russia. So I think what this opinion article is talking about, and I think what there's the immediate reaction from a lot of Ukrainians was, oh my God, I don't think these people who wrote this report, this model, put this model out, know Ukraine at all. Like, do they know what's been happening in the country since before 2014, since, there was the Orange Revolution, about moving closer to the West, democratic rights for Ukrainians in 2008, in 1991, when Ukraine first became independent. There's been this constant push under any government towards democracy, solidifying democracy in the country. And it really feels like these JP Morgan modelers were really thinking about, Trump's sort of accusations of Zelensky being a dictator when they were writing this report, rather than really looking at the solid reality on the ground.
Julia Lassica, thank you as ever for bringing us the Ukrainian newspaper review. The time here in London is 7:28. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. And look now at some of the other stories we're looking at today. US embassies have been told to stop scheduling appointments for student visas. A diplomatic cable from the Trump administration also said the State Department was preparing for an expansion of required social media screening and vetting of all applications. Ukraine's president will visit Berlin today. It's the first time Volodymyr Zelensky has been to the German capital since Chancellor Friedrich Merz assumed office. Panama has declared a state of emergency in one province after a strike at a banana plantation led to 5,000 workers being laid off. Workers at the US banana giant Chiquita took action over pension reforms. And a test flight of SpaceX's Starship rocket has failed for the third time in a row. Fuel leaks caused the rocket to spin out of control about half an hour after the launch. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 7:29 here in London. A close look now behind the headlines. Here's Gaia Lutz, our Lisbon correspondent, on why her city is stepping into the spotlight this week.
Springtime in Lisbon is marked not only by rising temperatures, but also a heated cultural agenda. Today sees the beginning of Lisbon Design Week, which unfolds across 93 venues throughout the city. And tomorrow marks the start of contemporary art fair Arco Lisboa at the Cordoaria Nacional. Both events run until Sunday. Sprawling tucked-away ateliers to showrooms, shops and major cultural institutions, Lisbon Design Week continues to put the spotlight on Portuguese crafts through exhibitions, site-specific installations, workshops and talks by over 200 designers. The growing program of the event, now in its third edition, reflects the momentum of the local design scene as a whole. This year, highlights include the Young Design Generation exhibit at the city's design museum, Muji, where 20 pieces by designers under 35 were selected from an open call. Also, Sobremesa, a cross-border exhibition curated by Spain's Mut Design and Portugal's João Xará. Bringing designers from both nations in dialogue, the exhibit will explore the nuances of table culture across the Iberian Peninsula at Arquivo Aires Mateus. Meanwhile, Arco, which landed in Lisbon from Madrid in 2016, has since become the country's main contemporary arts event. This edition of the fair unites 83 galleries from 17 countries, 30 of which from Portugal itself, under the roof of the city's old rope yard. Beyond Portugal and Spain, Brazil, Italy and Germany are strong presences at this year's gathering. From Monocle in Lisbon, I'm Gaia Lutz.
And my thanks to Gaia Lutz for that. For more from Monocle's editors and correspondents, sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. Last week, London hosted the Sauna Summit 2025, attracting a full house of enthusiasts from the international sauna community. One of the speakers was Karita Harju, who's CEO of the social network Sauna from Finland and author of The Power of Hot and Cold. She caught up with Monocle's Tom Webb after her session, debunking Finnish sauna myths to celebrate the joy of that hot room.
Well, the power of hot and cold, we are here in the sauna seminar, so obviously it's about the Finnish sauna and the heat. And the cold is more about the cold plunge, what we do in Finland, cold water swimming.
And you came here to give us your 7 rules of sauna. Now, there aren't any rules, is that right?
No, they were myths. So there are some misunderstandings about Finnish sauna. So my speak was more about to tell if there is a myth, they probably are the myth, or are they? So, for example, people are thinking that in Finland everybody goes naked in the sauna. That's not true. So it's like totally fine to keep a swimming suit or bathrobe or towel as long as you feel comfortable. We want sauna to be a safe place.
And those are the myths. Are there rules? Are there things that you cannot or shouldn't do in the sauna?
Well, what you can't do in the sauna, there is no rules, as I said in my speak too. It's like all the saunas, they make their own like house rules, sauna rules. So what I mean about that is more about, do you need to go to shower before and after, and do you need to use the pens towels, pens covers and so on, these kind of things. But there are not actually, we Finns, we don't eat in a sauna. So I wouldn't go if someone asked me, so don't go and eat in a sauna. I know there are people in Japan that they, for example, eat ice cream in a sauna. Well, that's quite funny for us, I think.
The Finnish ambassador to the UK had his own rule, and he said no media. No social media, no TVs. Where do you stand with that?
Yeah, and that's something like, of course, nowadays people have their phones everywhere. So we should keep the place, we should keep the sauna for the only place in the world that you don't need your phone. You need to pause from that.
And what is the heart of your book?
The Power of Hot and Cold from Sauna to Sea is co-authored with a wonderful person called Katja Panchar. So Katja is more into this cold plunge and cold swimming, and I'm writing about the Finnish sauna. So I think because of the sauna and the cold plunge is at the moment booming so much, so we wanted to share a book about our own experience and all the studies have been made through those areas. So, and actually in that book, there is a journey of me and Katja. I'm showing her like many saunas in Finland, and she's trying to teach me how to do the cold plunge because I'm not so used to that. And actually, that's not my thing, but I think it's booming. So that's why we wanted to do the thing together.
So how important is the cold plunge to the sauna experience?
Well, people are doing cold plunging without the sauna. So it's like a ritual itself. And sauna is a ritual itself. So you don't have to combine those. It's totally fine to have just the sauna or just the cold plunge. But I think what I do, for example, is more about when I am in the sauna. So I just also cool down or cool off, like just outside. Because in Finland we have snow and it's very cold weather. So you just take like 2 minutes. So that's my cold shower or cold plunge.
And finally, with all the knowledge of the myths and cold plunge, what's your advice for a perfect or a personal perfect sauna experience?
Well, at least you need time to do that, a good company, a safe place, a safe environment. Don't do anything what you don't want to do. So be prepared, and like when you are in the sauna, it's totally fine. Sit down in the lower benches and then try to create your own löyly. Yeah. So everybody can have their personal way of doing the sauna. So you just have to find it yourself too.
And those that don't know what a löyly is, if you can explain.
Well, yeah, the löyly is about throwing water to the hot stones. And then we create the löyly and the moisture for the sauna.
And that was Karita Harju, CEO of the social network Sauna from Finland and author of The Power of Hot and Cold, talking to Monocle's Tom Webb.
Craft is its own reward, which is why at UBS we're honoured to work alongside over 50 of today's leading Nobel laureates, each an expert in the art of economic science, bringing you engaging discussions, actionable insights, and inspired solutions, all focused around the questions that shape our world today. For a better outlook, find a Nobel perspective. UBS. Banking is our craft.
.37 here in London now. Can Europe, and in particular France, offer the kind of rules-based economic stability that was once provided by the United States? Well, that's what seems to be the intention of the French president this week as he embarked upon a tour of Southeast Asia, stops in Vietnam, Indonesia and Singapore included. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by James Chambers, Monocle's Asia Bureau Chief. Good to see you in London, James.
Morning, Emma. Great to be here. So
you're coming over to Europe. Europe's gone over to Southeast Asia. Emmanuel, I hope your wife didn't shove you in the face just before you got off a plane. How is Macron being received out there?
So it's midway, his trip is midway. He landed in Jakarta last night. And as you mentioned, in contrast to him landing in Vietnam, when he got off the plane, him and his wife were arm in arm walking down the stairs. There was no bickering before they departed. He's been, very well received. Last night at the airport, he got a kind of a 50-gun military welcome. The defense minister of Indonesia met him off the plane. Similar thing in Hanoi. So it's an important visit for the Vietnamese and the Indonesians, and also for Macron. I mean, he does fly around the world sometimes as a kind of de facto EU leader, but here he's very much arriving as the president of France.
And indeed, at a moment when, we had the ASEAN summit at the beginning of the week, when countries were deciding that they had to literally pull themselves together in order to come up with some sort of concerted plan in the face of Donald Trump's tariffs, which are clearly causing profound problems. And then all at once, the French president arrives saying, well, I'm here. And I mean, yes, it is France, but France connected, deeply embedded in like the European way of doing things. This is a moment, therefore, that you could assume that both sides are really relishing.
Indeed. I mean, after the Trump tariffs, which kind of blindsided the region a bit because they're so reliant on the US for trade and weren't expecting this. They've been looking for other partners and they're often caught between China and the US, and so they're looking elsewhere. They've been looking at the Gulf, but here comes Mr. Macron with his pitch, and he's very much selling it like that. He's saying you're caught between the superpowers, the often unreliable superpowers, or the American tariffs and I guess the fear of China dominating the region. Whereas we're Europe, we're kind, we're friendly, we're reliable, and he's been making this pitch for being respectful of sovereignty as well. So he's not hiding from the fact that he is trying to make the most of this bind that the region finds itself in.
Can this region actually pivot to Europe in the way that Macron sees as a possibility?
Well, I mean, it can deepen the ties with Europe, but I don't think Europe can replace either China or the US. And I don't think it's really trying to do that, because a lot of the questions and the conversations with the US is not just on trade, but it's also on security. And France isn't going to step up and sign all of these agreements to come to the defense of the region if China were to invade. So that's not on the equation. This very much feels like a trade visit, and Mr. Macron has his salesman's hat on. And he is looking at aviation in particular and in defence. So he's speaking right now with the president of Indonesia, President Prabowo, who is a military man. He is the former defence minister, and the top of the agenda is defence, and Macron is trying to sell fighter jets and submarines. And how receptive are the Indonesians to this? Well, they are very receptive. They need to modernise their military. A lot of their hardware is kind of old, aging kit that they bought from the mix of the Americans, the Brits, and the Russians. And Prabowo is the man who wants to try and modernise. He has been travelling around in his former role as the Minister of Defence, signing contracts. He is very interested in buying from the French. And during his time as the Minister of Defence, he did sign contracts to buy 42 Rafale fighter jets, and the first of which are meant to be delivered next year. So it'll be interesting to see when they do their press conference today what more announcements have been made on that front, because as I mentioned earlier, Macron was met off the plane by the Minister of Defence. He is going to visit a military academy. This has got a very much of a defence ring to it. And so I guess people will be watching to see if there are any new orders put in by the Indonesians and what's said on submarines as well. And indeed, let's touch on Vietnam. Before we go on to the sort of what was actually done and what agreements were made, I sort of joked at the beginning about Macron and the incident with Mrs. Macron at the top of the plane. Did that change the sort of like the mood in any way? Because obviously it was an enormous distraction if you were looking from the outside. But was it just a temporary distraction, or did people actually sort of pay attention, not necessarily for the right reasons? I mean, he'd be on safer ground in Asia. He's not going to be raked over the coals about that by anyone other than probably the French media. So, I mean, he explained it away and moved on. I think we here in Europe are probably paying more attention to it than they would be on the ground there. And I don't think it would affect the conversations he's having. But obviously it's not a very good look for the president of any country.
No, and he spent the rest of the time trying to, doing his best to make up for it. It says that, dozens of deals were signed with the Vietnamese. Do we know what they did?
Yeah, there seems to be like an aviation theme. So, in Indonesia, he's selling fighter jets. In Vietnam, it was commercial airlines. He was there with a delegation, and the Airbus chief was part of that. And they announced the sale of 20 Airbus aeroplanes to Vietjet, which is one of the leading Vietnamese privately owned carriers. So that was a kind of a big deal, I guess, for the trip, but I guess not in the same league as when Trump comes into town and sells a bunch of Boeings to the Gulf or gets a few free planes himself. So, I mean, it's important because I think the underlying thing is, I'd say, is France, I guess, seeing the threat from the Chinese. And I don't mean in terms of defense, I mean in terms of trade. The Chinese have developed their own airline, Comac, and while I doubt you're going to see any European airlines buy it or Americans buy it for years or decades to come, or if ever, Southeast Asia will be a huge market for that jet. And so he's probably keen to get in there with some more contracts to make sure Airbus can establish itself firmly in the region. And the same goes for fighter jets. I mean, the big story coming out of the India-Pakistan skirmish was the fact that the Pakistanis managed to shoot down some French-made Rafale fighter jets with Chinese technology. So, I mean, he'll be keen to sign some more contracts with the Indonesians and kind of try and, make sure they don't have any doubts about the technology following those incidents.
James Chambers, thank you so much for joining us in the studio. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Banking is our craft.
7:46 here in London. Now, getting on an aircraft is often the first taste of the country you're heading to, quite literally, whether it's a refreshing glass of blueberry juice on board Finnair or that tiny, rather confident little block of chocolate that you get on a Swiss flight. So why has Air Canada decided to start serving Japanese food? Well, Chiara Rimella is host of the menu on Monocle Radio, and she gets on a plane now too. She joins me on the line now. Good morning, Chiara.
Good morning to you, Emma.
Good to have you with us. So tell us, what is Air Canada serving, and do we know why?
Well, I think this is quite interesting, actually, because as you said, a lot of airlines do use their food offering as a soft power tool, obviously, and plenty of them have made over the years claims as to, being as close to what you can get on the ground as possible. I remember flying in New Zealand and getting to enjoy delicious New Zealand wines, and also being given a little cookie time, which for Kiwis is the most telling sign of kind of having arrived home. All the same, for some of Air Canada's flights that are going to Japan, there will be meals supervised by one Michelin-starred Japanese chef who is based in Toronto. So there is still a Canadian aspect there. They have offered Japanese in-flight meals in the past, but this is the first time that they have an actual Japanese chef looking over them. So I think this is interesting because I don't know about you, Emma, but sometimes you want to be experiencing the cuisine of the country that you're heading to, and you're lucky if you're flying via the airline of the nation that you're going to. But if you're leaving your home country on your home carrier and going somewhere, possibly on holiday, you sort of already want to get in the spirit of the holiday. And I've had it before where I've just been offered meals on Ita Airways or on British Airways, where you just sort of feel like you're holding back a little bit. It's a little bit like watching a film that's still very British if you're on the way to Japan. You sort of want to get in the mood for things. So I don't think it's that bad of an idea. In principle, obviously, it becomes really complicated when an airline is flying to many, many, many different destinations. So perhaps Japan here come out on top, but I think there is a case to be made for airlines also occasionally giving concessions to other countries where they're flying to when it comes to their food offering.
Does it not just open up the wider question of please serve decent food on an aeroplane? I mean, you can go on carriers nowadays, and if you've, in certain circumstances, you can have the world's smallest bag of pretzels and a tiny bottle of water thrown at you, and you actually just think this is more of an insult. You may as well just told us to get our own.
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, obviously, over the years, we have seen a lot of carriers reduce the amount of food that they even give people if they're not flying on the upper classes. I do think that the tide is somewhat turning in some respects. I mean, I recently went on a flight of ITA Airways to Cairo from Roma Fiumicino. I was not expecting any food. I'll put it out there straight away. It was a really late night flight, and then on the way back, a really, really early morning flight. So I was definitely not wanting for my sleep to be disturbed. And I was served an actual 3-course meal by an airline that, has been through, lots of adventures itself financially. So I was really not expecting that. And, with the menu, Monocle's own podcast about food, we do try to keep on top of news when it comes to airlines investing into food as well. We know that Finnair is putting a lot of effort into upping its game. And I mean, there are some airlines that have made headlines with quite extravagant offerings. Like Delta made a headlines because they partnered with Shake Shack for its first class offerings. You could pre-order a burger to have on first class. Debates were obviously had as to whether a burger is a first class offering. But if it's a very nice burger, why not? All the same, there are efforts being made to sort of change the narrative and go a bit beyond the usual sort of cliched offering of a first class as well.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to think what happens to people's insides 5 hours after a Shake Shack and in an aeroplane. It's probably not something that I really do want to think about for very long. There is that thing, isn't there? Is it you talk about, the rethinking the first class offering. Stitched into it should be some national pride as well. I mean, you just mentioned that Finnair is upping its game. The glory of seeing an Itala Tuli glass coming out on the trolley is one of those moments when you just think, actually, that this is when an airline really, really thinks about it, that actually it incorporates design, not just the taste of the food, but a whole national offering appears.
Completely. I mean, we know that Finnair does this really well. I think it's interesting that someone like Air France, for example, is also collaborating with 3-star Michelin chefs for some of its offerings. Some airlines know when to lean into what makes them famous internationally. Obviously, the Japanese airlines have always led the way in this, I think. But I do want to sort of bring your attention also to the way that other means of transportation are going more and more into this mood as well. Because obviously airlines have been doing this for years and years. But I think as we see a revival in rail travel across Europe, certainly, we're seeing a lot of railway operators also remember about their restaurant carts. Recently I was doing a story for Confect on a night train going from Budapest to Split, and readers will be happy to know that it's coming out in the new issue of Confect. But they have repurposed a 1980s restaurant cart, and you can get a full menu of Hungarian specialties. You get handed this menu that goes from goulash to cold cuts to soups, all sorts, on these kind of beautiful velvet chairs careening through the countryside. Now that is an incredible experience, difficult to replicate on an airline, but I think, I saw some colleagues in Südtirol over the weekend enjoying a schnitzel on an OBB, train through the South Tyrolean countryside. I think it's lovely that it's not just a little ham and cheese toasty anymore, but people are really leaning back into the joy of the restaurant cart.
And I wish the joy to the person who has to deep fry a schnitzel on a train. Chiara Romella, thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. And just a reminder, you can catch Chiara's programme The Menu on Monocle Radio every Friday at 2000 right here in London. And we talk travel and food with Rashmi Narayan now, travel, food and drink writer. Very good morning to you. Joining us on the line from Bangalore.
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much. And good morning to you too.
It's good to have you with us. I'm not quite sure of how much of the last item you heard, but it was a celebration of good catering on transport. Are there good examples of that where you are, or good examples that you've experienced?
That is such a good topic, actually, because nobody talks about the actual journey. It's all about the destination. But I'd say some have upped their game a bit. Even in economy, I'd say Emirates has definitely done that. American Airlines, not so much. So there's some airlines where I just wish I could just get to the destination as soon as possible. I don't mind doing some intermittent fasting until I get there and just eat proper food. But somewhere I'm like, this is not too bad.
Treat it as a health kick. I don't know. Right, let's talk about, the destinations that we are talking about for this summer. Guess what? Greece, Portugal, Italy and Spain. Here in Europe, everybody is picking the old favourites.
Yeah, we've talked about over-tourism last year, and I don't know, despite that, it's like, no, we're going to go to the same places. And I guess we're all guilty of it, because who doesn't love the Greek islands or the south of Spain or even the Dolomites in Italy? But I have seen a slight trend where people want to keep these popular destinations, but they're keeping their bases elsewhere. Like I noticed that Eindhoven in the Netherlands, for example, has become more popular as a cheaper alternative, because it's just that easy to get around the Netherlands by train. So it's like, let's stay in Eindhoven, but let's get the train and go to do a day trip in Amsterdam. That way the locals are happy. We're not annoying them by staying in an Airbnb, and yet we have a cheaper and nice alternative, and actually quite a scenic train journey.
And it is one of those things that actually, if you do put yourself slightly out of a city centre, you can actually have a bit more of a sort of a local breathing space moment.
Oh, absolutely. And even if you go to places like Northern Ireland or let's take even Morocco, stay out of Marrakesh. As you rightly said, it's so much more scenic. You will actually get to interact with locals who are actually happy to welcome you, and not locals in the city centre going, oh God, these guys again with their Instagram. So it might actually be worth it, and everybody wins because it's much cheaper and you get a much nicer place for what you're paying.
Indeed, I think they're called destination dupes nowadays. Nocturnal tourism has been around for probably longer than we think now, hasn't it? How much of a staple is it?
I think with the Aurora and Northern Lights this year, it's actually spiked a lot more because, yes, as you rightly said, stargazing's been very popular. We even know night safaris in Kenya and parts of Tanzania have been very popular. But last year, I don't know if you saw it, Emma, but I was very unlucky with not spotting the Northern Lights, whereas everyone around me in England was like, look at this, I can just see it from my backyard. But that's what's actually made it even more popular, where we've got night safaris, not just across the world, but even within England, where people are going up to Northumberland to go stargazing and possibly catch the Northern Lights. It's meant to be the highest this year.
And it is also an urban thing as well.
It is, definitely, because I guess because the solar activity is so strong, people are like, yes, we'll definitely go to Iceland because it is, still a very gorgeous island, regardless of Northern Lights or not. But there are other parts of, Finland and even the UK where people don't have to go too far and watch this spectacle and not pay that much as well. So nocturnal tourism is definitely helping, even if we're not talking about the Northern Lights. I was in the Maldives 2 weeks ago on a girls' trip, and even where I was staying at this place in Oliveli Island, it was amazing to just have dinner, step out, and everybody was crowding around the pier. And I thought, what's going on? And it was stunning. 11 p.m, there was a little spotlight in the sea, and we could see a huge group of manta rays just feeding off plankton, and it was just right there. And I said, I don't even have to book a tour for this. This is actually a thing.
Rashmi Narayan, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Bangalore. And that's all the time we have for today's Globalist. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers, Hassan Anderson, Anita Riotta and Monica Lillis. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London, and The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.